excited. Good topics today. Now we heard some great leaders speak today around purpose and brand, and obviously the way that you can kind of instill and drive purpose while also building brands. Stuff from social impact and philanthropic commitments to things such as sustainability, impact, and taking action. But when we talk about a lot of this, and I'll definitely intro Mustafa, it comes at a cost potentially, and that's what we really want to talk about when it comes to responsibility and profitability today. So first, I want to hand it off to Mustafa to maybe give us a little bit of background on about you, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me. I'm Egyptian. I just moved to New York, actually. I was just telling people about the experience of moving to New York, which is quite interesting, as I'm sure many of you can realize. But also, I've just moved from heading one of our sectors to head our global foods team. So I've been with Pepsico 15 years, did a couple of roles, and now, as of February this year, my job is to take our global foods business, and as I would like to explain it, change the future of food. And that's actually my idea of taking the role. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm responsible for all our foods functions. So that's marketing, innovation, insights, strategy, and everything else, with the idea of transforming how we think about foods and our role in the global foods ecosystem.
Awesome. So maybe I should give a little bit of background on myself too. Not that it's that important, but so as you guys heard, at PwC, my background has largely been on the product side, specifically focused on the ad tech, media, martech ecosystem. So I'm really excited, especially with what we heard today, and a lot of how the Lumascape and the fragmentation of the ecosystem that's happening, and how what consumers are driving is changing that. So, let's start talking with responsible business, and it's an incredibly broad topic. But in Pepsi, what does it mean?
So let me explain that by maybe explaining a very important concept and idea that we launched a couple of years ago. This idea of Pepsico Positive, and that is an end-to-end transformation that our CEO and our board launched a couple of years ago. And at the core of it is the belief that you can only have a long-term sustainable growth and return to shareholders by doing the right thing, by impacting what we call people and planet, and by using our scale of our brands, scale of our supply chain to impact the world at large. So it's actually such a core element of our vision and our strategy that when we present strategy or present even annual plans, there's a pillar in the plan which we call the better pillar, which is about how we are actively impacting people and planet.
Interesting. So when we think about that, where did this vision kind of come from? Like, is it consumer-led, or is it internal-led, or a mixture of both? I'd be curious to see what drives it, or what is driving it, and why now?
That's a great question. So it comes from our company's belief that long-term shareholder return can only be achieved if you are investing in being a better company and doing the right thing. And now, it does, if you look at all the stakeholders map, not all of them are at the same, and that's one of the things we should talk about. Not all of them realize it and value it in the same way. What I mean by that is, I think there's realization among shareholders, maybe among regulators, among certain parts of our stakeholder map, that is good for business, but it comes with challenges on supply chain, on cost, and on small things like consumers' willingness to pay. I'm sure many of you, we have quite a few marketeers and a few brand experts, that is one of the real challenges. It's the right thing to do. It comes at a cost, and you don't always get the right consumer willingness to pay to cover that cost, and that's a real challenge. But we have decided that is the right way to do things, and we've made investments, and I can give you tons of examples where we, regardless of what the consumer actually was willing to pay for and regulation, we went and said that's the right thing to do, and we're going to make that investment.
Very interesting. So You know, also with what you guys are doing and what's happening is there's some ambitious goals out there, right? Such as increasing nutritious food to 50 million people by 2030. How does Pepsi, like, specifically stuff like that, kind of enable that? How do you go about, in a way, achieve that?
I'd actually like to do many more than 50 million. I mean, and I think we will do more than 50 million. I mean, there are a couple of ways we do that. So first of all, we've had that for years. We have the Pepsico Foundation. It's a 100% non-profit organization financed by Pepsico, and that does a lot of things, and you can read about that in the annual report. It invests in impacting people and underprivileged communities and solving as many of the problems as they can solve. So that's actually a lot of the source, and they're the ones leading the 50 million. But also our brands, and that's part of my mission and my belief. I'm Egyptian. I've traveled all over the world. I've visited very privileged parts of the world, and I've seen, the impact that we can make on things like the farming and agriculture ecosystem. And that's just an example, and I'll use that example in a second. But we also want our brands to play a positive role, given first their reach. I'll give you a number that I always find shocking when I say it. We have business in 200 countries, and we serve 1 billion consumers a day. Just the scale of that number is, I say it every time, and every time I cannot imagine how big that is. Just 1 billion people are interacting with our products every day. So we have access more than, I say, most, if not all companies in the world, just because of the sheer number of transactions. And we impact their livelihoods and their lives, whether nutrition as well as their livelihoods, because we are one of the biggest buyers of potatoes, for example. We actually are the single biggest buyer of potato in the world. We have a direct impact on the future of farming. So that is something other than feeding the 50 million. We have hundreds of thousands of farmers that rely on us buying from them. So that's another example, and there are a few other examples on the other brand.
So, with this kind of poses, especially that kind of impact and that kind of global impact almost in every corner of the world, poses a lot of unique challenges. What would be like a unique challenge that you feel that you've kind of faced when it comes to responsibility that's outside of cost alone? And how have you found to navigate it in a way?
So I'm speaking to a group that probably understand many of these challenges, but the cost is one of them, and it's a big challenge, a serious challenge. But also there are challenges in thinking about product development and innovation. Cost is related, but if you think about, for example, the work we're doing on Lay's, we've made a commitment that we're gonna have a major reduction in sodium and saturated fat on Lay's. Lay's is a fantastic product. It's potato, you fry the potato and you add flavor, and it's the best thing you can eat. But at the same time, and eating it off the line, I guarantee you, is the best experience in the world. But also, because of its reach, we want to contribute positively to nutrition across the world by taking the negatives out, what we call taking the negatives out. So that's sodium, because we know that impacts people's health, and saturated fat. But that comes first at a cost. Second, it has an impact on sometimes the perception, sometimes the actual taste. And the reality is, people are not willing to sacrifice the taste of a product, even though we are actually giving them something that we know is better for them, because it's lower in saturated fat and sodium. So it is a cost challenge, but also an innovation challenge. So our R&D teams we have phenomenal R&D teams. They spend hundreds of hours, probably thousands of hours, on solving these problems in every single market. And because at the end of the day, you cannot do the right thing while destroying value for shareholders and the company, because then that's not sustainable, right? You end up, and it just doesn't work. So that is a big challenge. That's one of them. The other big challenge is how you talk about it to consumers. I'll pick that same example. In the UK, we've gone through significant reduction in our sodium, But when we went to consumers, and regulation has been driving it across, but we were ahead of regulation. And we said, you know what, this is lower sodium. A lot of the consumers said, that means you've taken the taste down, it's not as tasty. So we've done something that is driven by our belief, by regulation, but consumers have a challenge accepting it. So there's a communication challenge. And add to that, if you just take away the product piece, even talking about some of the issues that we believe in, and is always a challenge because you have to link it to something that is meaningful to the consumers, but also that's true to the brand. So there's a creative challenge as well.
So, you know, that was going to be my next thing, is how do you kind of educate both your stakeholders as well as your consumers around these kind of corporate responsibility efforts, especially because when you change the flavor, sometimes you're like, oh, maybe I don't like potato chips anymore. What steps have you taken when we think about marketing, right? And we go out in terms of messaging, connecting with consumers, especially in today where we can connect one-to-one with many of the consumers, comparatively to 20 years ago when it was on TV and it was more at a household level or something like that. So how is Pepsi going about kind of educating that? Are some of your marketing campaigns more focused around education and less around awareness and branding?
So I wish I would give you a very easy and simple answer. That is one of the biggest challenges for someone in my job, and I think for all the category or marketing heads across the world. The answer will depend on the market, the brand, and the stage of development, right? So I'll give you an example. So I'll take Quaker. Quaker is one of our most purposeful brands, and it's a brand that is rooted in, it's born good, like we say, right? It's a brand that has a direct impact on health of consumers. It's a very nutritious brand, and it's very easy to take a brand like Quaker and think about the impact it can and has the right to talk about, and consumers find meaningful. So for example, in Quaker, we have this program which actually started in Latin America, and we're now expanding to the rest of the world, where we have identified that there is, and it's not news, but there's a direct link between nutrition in the morning and how kids do at school. There's a direct link. I mean, if kids, and especially young and preschool, and as they get into early years of school, if they don't have the right nutrition in the morning, their cognitive abilities get impacted, and their performance in school doesn't do so well. And that is, education is the best predictor of long-term prosperity. So it has a huge impact on them, their families, and their communities. So we've made a decision, although they probably would never have been buyers of Quaker, they never afford Quaker, but because the brand is about healthy start and nutrition, we worked with an NGO to create a product. We created specifically that addresses the nutrition gaps with these children, and we are giving it distributing it through the NGO, so it's managed by them, I think it's hundreds of thousands of kids, and it keeps growing every day. Starts in Latin America, and one of the smaller countries in Latin America is now traveling to Canada, to the UK, and we're taking that and taking that globally. So that's an example of how a brand, smaller brand than Lay's, but can do that really well. So that's a really good example. Now, in other brands, what we do is we think about, and that's always a challenge, how to tell a story in a way that is meaningful. So one of the things that we're doing in, for example, Lay's, is linking it back to farmers. But if you, think about, I also talked to a group that also has a strong level of creativity and creative awareness. If you go to consumers and just talk about the regenerative farming practices and the fact that we're doing things that keep the farmlands producing and yielding better for a longer period of time, I think a small percentage of consumers would really, really care. That's the reality of it, right? They would care, but it would not have a direct impact on their perception of or the purchase of the brand. So what we do is in different countries, we've done different things, and I think we can evolve, try to link it back to how the farmers and the practices of farming and agriculture help create the best potato, help create the best product that then we can give to them. In Brazil, and I can tell you about my Brazil visit, they translated that, and they've done some incredible work in regenerative farming. They translated that into the 48-hour promise. So because they've invested so much in farming and agriculture, they came back with a story that the story we want to tell is that from the day we pick the potato to the day it's on the shelf, there's a maximum, it's actually 24 hours when they took me through the timeline, but they made the promise that it's 48 hours. And that is meaningful for consumers. It doesn't tell the story of everything we invest in regenerative farming and technology, but that is meaningful for consumers.
That's very interesting. Actually, since you hit on the Brazil trip, let's hear a little bit about it, because I know when you came back, you had a lot. It was eye-opening for you as well. And I'm curious, and I'm sure the audience is curious to hear a little bit more about the trip and what you learned and saw there, especially as it pertains to kind of purpose and pushing that along into the brands.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, every time I travel all over Pepsico, and what I see, especially in countries where we're investing in agriculture and development of agriculture, I always walk away with a lot of awe. And when I was in Brazil, we were lucky enough to actually travel to one of these farms, one of the biggest farmers, turns out, in the world. It's a Brazilian company that we work with, and they farm a lot of products. Potato is part of what they do. And the pride, and what really struck me the most, is that the owner of the farm was the one telling the story about regenerative farming and conservation of the ecosystem and the water, and how they make sure that they don't use any of the water supply and the replenishing water. And he was telling the story with such pride and such joy in what he's doing, although it does have a cost impact. And if you dig into it, it actually has a cost impact, and it's not a small cost impact, because these guys, they use technology in identifying where there are water challenges and there's less water challenges. They use drones, and they have specific sensors that tell you that maximize the yield, and these things are quite expensive. But the pride they had was honestly something that struck me. And then how that pride translates into, at the end of the day, a better output. So over time, when you invest in regenerative farming, which these guys have done, when you invest in better technology, over time you get better yields. And over time, as the consumer evolves, you can tell the story of, I mean, it takes years for people to catch up. You can then make a story around, you know, we have been doing this for 10 years. We have better soil. Brazil has better output. There's less water usage in potato farms, which are generally very water intensive. They consume a lot of water because of all the investments we've made over the years, and we've made these investments because they are the right thing to do.
And they're also helping in that way, because these investments are also helping a lot of farmers in terms of, yes, it's more costly, but at the same time, it's probably helping the environment near them to thrive a little bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, just as an example, one of the practices is that if you to do regenerative farming properly, and I'm not an agriculture expert, but you also have to change the crop every few years, right? If you keep the same crop, which in the short term makes sense, right? Because you can just keep generating more crop per whatever it is, hectare or whatever measure you want to choose. You actually work with the farmer to farm something completely different, and something that is not even, it's not a potato, it's not something that we buy from them. But because we know on the long term, it is better for the land, it's better for the farmer, and eventually it's better for us.
And that's, you know, when we think about responsibility, kind of especially corporate responsibility, doing the right thing, and you know, looking forward, we always think about in terms of costs, in terms of the company itself that's doing it, and in terms of the output. I feel like sometimes we forget about the intangibles, which is, as you just said, the farmers are so, they have so much pride in what they're doing, and more so than historically, because, you know, they're doing the right thing, and they're seeing the impact firsthand of doing it better than they used to in the past. And I think those are the pieces that I think a lot of times consumers sometimes miss out on, because it's not only just about the environment, it's also about the people on the bottom too. As marketers, partnerships and collaboration is probably one of our biggest items on the list, right? Like, that's essentially, we have so many different, whether it's agencies or vendors, we work with so many different people. When it comes to corporate responsibility, are there any kind of notable partnerships that you feel are very important to really get this done? Because without it, you might fail.
I think partnerships are important. I think that the way we approach it is we wanna partner with whoever can create big impact on the coast. And in a lot of the things I just spoke about, so water, regenerative agriculture, we didn't talk about the beverage side of the business, and I spent quite some years there. We're actually partnering with some of our competitors. We're creating industry groups. We're asking them to join because that is the way we change the food ecosystem. Right? And of course we have NGO partners. I just gave the example in Latin America, so that's an NGO, and we have similar NGO partners on Quaker everywhere else. We're also evolving in how we think about our customers, including, for example, our away from home customers. So when we want to work on, so one of the things that, it's not the topic for today, but one of the things we're thinking about is how the fact that our products and our brands play a much bigger role than just snacking. I mean, in the US, but especially outside the US. So we're thinking of, and we're partnering with what we call away from home. So that's basically your restaurants, where people consume products outside their home. And we're creating what we're calling culinary guardrails on what kind of innovation, what kind of partner we want to work with. And one of these guardrails is the sustainability agenda. For us, it's very important. So I want to say that it is almost now a prerequisite to whoever we want to work with. And we're opening the door more and more to partnerships across competition, customers, NGOs that support our cause.
You know, we talk about increased costs, and that's just, it's just going to happen with how, with corporate responsibility and doing things. That's going to impact people, environment, our future. Do you feel, and this is kind of off the cuff, is that consumers have a responsibility to kind of say, like, listen, I am going with this brand because I believe in it. And do you see, with especially consumers changing behaviors, how this is kind of impacting, is it further driving your corporate responsibility because you have consumers leaning in at the same time and understanding?
I would love to say yes, but it's actually not happening. That's the reality of it. I mean, there is always in these big, I'd say, human challenges, I've found that over the years, there's always a say-do gap. I mean, and we have data to back that up. People say they want something, but they don't always do it. And they always act. I mean, the percentage of people that say that they will only buy a brand or a product if it is delivering on this criteria, whether it's health criteria or sustainability criteria, is usually quite large because nobody will ever say, no, I don't care. It doesn't happen. But when you ask them, and even if it's just asking, not asking them to actually make a decision to purchase, would you pay more for it? The percentage goes down generally by 5x. So, it's generally 20% of people. Sometimes it's less, depending on the country. So that is a real challenge, and that's a real challenge. And waiting for consumers to be the ones that ask for it might make sense from a pure financial point of view, but in my view, in our view as a company, doesn't make sense from a stakeholder/shareholder value point of view. On the long term, doing the right thing is what matters. So a lot of in Brazil, let's pick the example. So in the Brazilian team, and Brazil is a country that has significant gaps in income, as you know, and there's a big population that can't afford a lot of things that they want to buy. But they made the decision to shift all of Lay's to very expensive, lower saturated fat oil. They didn't talk about it because if they talk about it, consumers, they did it silently. And it's a multi-million-dollar investment. But they made the investment because the right thing to do. And the general manager was telling me with such pride that he did the right thing for the Brazilian consumer.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's about leading and then bringing the consumers along in a journey. And slowly, I think, over a longer term, it'll kind of shift that behavior. Because everyone likes to talk the talk, but not walk the walk. And that's in almost every facet of our lives in a way, to a certain degree. So listen, we have a few minutes left, and I'm curious, what's the next focus? What are you working on? Where do you want to kind of go? Is it digging deeper in this area? Is it going wider?
So I don't believe, but also I know our senior leaders and board doesn't believe that there's an end point to this idea of Pepsico Positive. I mean, we've announced goals, we have commitments, we have 2025 goals, we have 2030 goals, and we track progress diligently versus these goals. Some areas we're doing great, some areas we need to do better. It's just the nature of it. But it doesn't stop at when 2030 comes, we've delivered and we've checked the box. It's a continuous improvement. And what we are now working on, for example, I'll tell you about the food team, is what's next, not just in the removal of negatives. We're now thinking about what we're calling the addition of positives. So we worked with an external agency and company to identify what are the biggest gaps in nutrition across the world and what has the biggest impact on human health. And we found that diverse ingredients, so things like whole grains and others, are the number one correlated ingredient with lower heart disease. And we know there's a significant deficiency across the world. So we are actually, and I can say that in this group, I don't think we've announced yet the full plan. I think it's going to come up soon. We are working on very specific initiatives to incorporate whole grains in many of our products where we can. So in many of our products that we can put in, the type of corn that you use, the type of even changing some of reformulating the ingredient. It is much more expensive. The reality is few consumers will be willing to pay more for it, but we know it has an impact on human health. So that's the next challenge that's one of the next challenges for the R&D team. So how do we just go from the removal of negatives to the addition of positives?
So we kind of heard, no one's really gets away from profitability when it comes to responsibility. I think small brands or large global brands alike, in a way. What advice do you have to your fellow CMOs and marketing leaders to do, to kind of balance the two?
So the first thing I would say is always think of the consumer the way you think about your own family. So actually, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company said that to me, and someone I have a lot of regard for. She said, if this is something you would want for your kids, that's what you should be doing. And if it's not, then you should go and change it. So bring yourself and your beliefs to what you do. I think it's very important as a person. Now, how you make that work, I think you need to balance and not go either way. So a lot of my counterparts would probably argue that you just go all the way and profitability can suffer. That's not okay, because at the end of the day, the financial health of a company, doing that and balancing, exactly the topic I'm talking about, balancing them is what will help shareholders and stakeholders continue supporting it. But at the same time, don't take shortcuts. And stay true to what the brand and the company is about. We didn't talk about brands today, but one of the things that we are pushing, and I'm pushing very hard, is that also brands have a role. Our brands, like I said, reach 1 billion consumers a day. So our brands also have messages, carry messages to consumers, right? A brand like Doritos, for example, has a very clear message on removing biases in society and taking away the way any discrimination or looking at people through very specific angles, right? And it uses the fact that it's a triangle to tell the story, which I think is brilliant. So, but that's true to the brand. It's true to the brand stands for. So stay true to yourself. Make sure that you balance both, but then stay true to the company and the brand. Don't try to do something just because it's the nice thing to do or it's the fashionable thing to do if it's not true to the company and the brand.
In order to impact long-term, you got to last long-term, so the balance is very important on that side, for sure. And 1% better every day is better than 100% in one day kind of thing, so we can get there. Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you, Mustafa. I do want to open it up to a question or two if we do have a minute or two for questions.
Yeah, we can ask. past role and your new role, how are you addressing high fructose corn syrup?
High
High
glucose.
fructose corn syrup, so it's, right. I mean,
Okay.
we're going to move healthy. I've been a Pepsi person my entire life. My grandmother worked at Pepsi. I eat Quaker Oats every day. But I'm just wondering, and I'm a Gatorade person, so I'm just wondering on that one thing. It's not, you're talking about moving it, so I don't know
Yeah.
if you have a high fructose corn syrup.
So, I mean, if your question is about our beverage business and how we are investing in taking away sugar in general, not just that specific ingredient, that is actually also a commitment. I mean, I didn't talk about beverages today. I'm quite familiar with what they're doing, but my focus is food. We actually have made a commitment quite some time back to significantly reduce the average number of grams of sugar per serving. And we've been at it diligently year after year. I mean, Pepsi Black, for example, is a great example. And the R&D have spent, I don't know, thousands of hours getting the best possible formula that is zero sugar, so it doesn't have any of the sugar ingredients, but also gives consumer the same refreshing taste. So that is an actual investment that we've made. And by the way, I mean, you're probably familiar with the US market. We've made that commitment everywhere in the world, even in markets where consumers actually look at sugar as a positive nutrition ingredient, and some actually consumers rely on it. We've made a commitment that that's something we want to do across the world.